What's the scariest moment you've encountered in your whole life? I used to live near a large open stormwater drain with no fencing around it. 3 drunk guys drove their car straight into it. I went out and found the driver trying to get his friend's foot out of the windshield. On the field on other side of the drain I saw the third passenger who was covered in blood. I asked if they were okay and my neighbor called the ambulance police. The blood-covered friend passed out and was twitching, so I ran to the car, grabbed a towel from the back seat, and ran to help him. I found a large, deep cut on the back of his neck head. I rolled him to his back and used the weight of his head to put pressure on the wound. I was talking to him, trying to keep him awake, and he went into shock, twitching and unresponsive. This was the moment I thought a man died in my hands. I was able to wake him, and the ambulance took over from there. That was the most harrowing moment of my life. Doctors inform me that our 2-year-old daughter has high white blood cell counts and is likely an indicator of pediatric cancer, while wife is traveling for work. Have to go get additional blood work and wait days for results. Turns out she was fighting some bug and is healthy, but that precious few days was the scariest time of my life. I used to be a mountaineer, and I was on an expedition on Aconcagua, the tallest mountain in the Americas. We were at Camp 3 around 6,000 mile in altitude and set to push for the summit in the morning. I'd been feeling a bit nauseated and sluggish that day, but nothing too alarming. But I woke up in the middle of night and something was horribly wrong. My head felt it was split open. I couldn't stop vomiting, dry heaving, and I was talking gibberish. The world was upside down to me. I felt overheated, even though it was approaching 50°C with the wind chill. I don't remember much of that night, but I had a bit of clarity once my teammate injected me with a steroid used to combat altitude sickness. I was told I was developing high-attitude cerebral edema and I would die if I didn't descend. The problem was that a massive blizzard had come in, even without the storm. Helicopters could not get me. By morning, the storm had lessened a bit, and a guide from another team heard what had happened. He agreed to help me get down the mountain, but within an hour, the storm was raging again. I lost in the snow for a while and my body was depleted of energy. I slumped down into a snowdrift, realizing I was going to die. I wasn't scared then, but felt a calm peacefulness. Thank God something eventually kicked in. Some sort of survival instinct, and the sheer terror of the situation hit me hard. Thank God my guide followed my tracks, gave me more medicine, and over the next 7 hours, made our way down. The fear hit me really badly that night in base camp. That realization that I should be dead is harder to describe. I got severe sun, high altitude is weird, and wind burns on my face. Lost chunks of my cheeks for a while. I now have signs of having it be from my brain swelling. I still love the mountains, but I hike instead of mountaineer. My life is too precious now. My urine tube closed up. Bladder nearly burst. 6 months of a tube in my stomach to have my urine tube hacked open again through the skin between my balls and asshole. Seeing my dad collapsed on the floor and my mom panicking and crying trying to call an ambulance. Then seeing him die. He was clinically dead for just over a minute there on the floor and be revived by the EMTs and be carted off to the hospital. He later died a second time and could not be brought back. I was 12 and I'm the one who called all the family members while waiting for the ambulance. I'm the one who had to tell my grandma her son might die. Got stopped 3 times on one night by a Mexican drug cartel while I was driving through the middle of nowhere in a pitch black midnight. My younger brother sleepwalks. He'd just stand by my bed silently until I'd snap awake and see his silhouette looming over me. Sometimes he turns on the lights when he's sleepwalking. I woke up one night and he was standing there, turning the lights on and off, on and off. I got him back to bed and I went downstairs to sleep for the rest of the night. At around 4 AM, I woke up to see all of the lights downstairs were switched on. That moment you know you're going to be in a near possibly fatal car crash, and there is no longer anything you can do to avoid it. So you close your eyes and await impact, and so much happens in that moment. It's like time stands still, then it stops, and you survived. and you're cognizant, and you look around to assess the situation. Look down at your mangled self. It's been almost 25 years. I've blocked a lot of it, but I can still see all that blood on my hands. Earlier this year, while backing our truck up at night on a mountain road, our rear tire slipped off the road. The truck rolled twice down the side of the very steep mountain. We miraculously landed upright on a fire road below the road we'd been on originally. The moment the first tire went off the side and I could feel us falling, was by far the scariest moment of my life. When I was a kid in 1973, I went fishing with my brother and cousin. We had to cross a low water bridge over the creek. It started raining pretty hard, and after a while we thought we'd better head back. By this time, water was about hip deep over the bridge we had to cross back over, and it was really churning. We looked around and found a long branch that we all held onto as we crossed. About halfway across, I lost my footing and fell in. Still holding on, this caused my cousin to fall in, and so my brother was left holding onto the branch with both of us in the water. In the meantime, our older sister showed up and found my brother's parked motorcycle, with water now inching up the spokes. We couldn't hear anything but the roar of the swollen creek. A couple of police officers were now looking on. Sister, all 90 pounds of her, decided she'd better rescue us. So she came from her side of the bridge. When she got to us, the water swept her off, but she grabbed onto the branch. And at this point brother is holding onto the branch with all three of us. We're beyond panic in what was definitely a flash flood. If we let go, we'd be swept down the rocky creek bed to God knows where. We struggled to hang on. The cops finally removed their gun belts and came to our rescue. I really thought I was going to die that day. My brother was a hero. When I was 13, I was staying at a hotel in New York with my family and decided to get some hot chocolate in the lobby. When I went back to the elevator, there was already a man in it holding the door for me. He had pressed the button for a different floor than mine, and I pressed my floor. The whole time in there he was just staring at me. When the elevator stopped at my floor, I got out. The man waited, but I had a weird feeling and noticed he had gotten out too, which immediately made me suspicious. I contemplated throwing my hot chocolate at him, but decided to just run to my parents' room. When he saw me knocking on the door, he went back in the elevator. Thinking back, I was extremely lucky that the hotel had open floors where each floor sort of looks down on the lobby. I'm sure if it was more closed he would have done something. When I saw someone try and jump off a bridge, only to be talked down as I was driving past, and then change their mind and jump at exactly the moment I passed. One moment they were there, and then I looked in the side mirror. They fell and were just gone, and there was nothing I could do about it. Oxygen tank cut off air while on a scuba dive, 15 male underwater at night. To this day no one knows how the oxygen tank closed. It wasn't malfunctioning cause I realized the problem 20 minutes into the dive. For 20 minutes there was absolutely no problem. Being told I had cancer at age 27, but they didn't know at that point whether it was treatable or not. It was. It's 34 years ago now. My wife and I were backpacking in a semi-remote area with our dog. We made camp and swam in a nearby river for a while before making dinner. As we're eating, our dog starts barking, and I look up to see a guy walking down the hillside toward our camp. As he comes closer, I see that he's visibly tweaking. He's not wearing a shirt, and around his neck he's wearing a double coil of thick chain attached with a combination master lock. At his waist he has a Japanese style katana, but the hilt handle has been replaced with a large elk antler. I walk over to see what he wants, and my usually friendly dog is going crazy, barking and growling at him. He won't make eye contact with me and keeps stealing glances at my wife. We're in the middle of nowhere, and he tells me he's looking for a place to set up camp, and he has some friends coming up. He mentions something about a goat, but he's mumbling, so I don't really catch it. I say okay, and he starts looking around where we are camped, and says this looks like a pretty sweet spot. He turns around and starts walking around the area. He then pulls out the katana and starts hacking branches off trees. This isn't some prop katana. It's hacking off 3 branches in one fell swoop. My hair is standing on end and my gut tells me not to stick around to see how this movie ends. He tells us he's going to mark the main trail, so his bud is nowhere to come down and find him. As soon as he leaves, we immediately pack up our shit and hike out 8 miles in the dark. On the way out, we have our headlamps on. Walking down a single track trail, we come around a corner and a guy in a white tank top sees us, turns around and bolts down the trail back the way he came from in the direction we are walking. I'm extra weirded out now. We round a curve and he's standing there breathing heavy. My headlamp catches his face and he's smiling. I pause and tell him we are just hiking out. He smiles again, looks at our dog, and says nice puppy. We sidle past him and pass a large cooler that he was obviously dragging up the trail. No idea what was in it, but it definitely had been used to store bloody meat at some point as the outside was covered in old dry blood. No idea what would have happened, but I imagined them camped next to us in the middle of nowhere, asking us to party with them. My dad always told me to trust my gut, and I'm glad I did. Too long didn't read, possibly avoided a deliverance scenario in the middle of Tweaker backcountry. When my son was born C-section, he stopped breathing. The doctors managed to revive him. It felt like 5 minutes of sheer panic, but in reality it was more like 30 seconds. I have the whole thing on video. I was recording when they lift him above the sheet and forgot to press stop on the recording. I watched the video back a couple of years later, and you can hear the panic in my voice. I asked the nurse if he was going to be okay, and she said she doesn't know. Luckily 9 years later has a very healthy, happy boy. Losing my 3-year-old at a crowded children's museum. I was tending to her brother, and when I turned around she was gone. I scoured the entire 2 floors of the place and found her in the last place I looked, happily playing at the water station. She had even put a smock on herself. I was on final approach to a local airport and had chosen runway 26 to land, because that's what you are supposed to do at this particular airport, unless the wind favors another runway. There was a 3-knot tailwind and I should have landed the opposite direction on runway 8, but I thought, what the heck? I can basically fly straight in, and it's only 3 knots. I'm running low on fuel and I'm a student pilot flying solo, so I don't want to fly around the airport. I just want to get down and fill up. I get down to about 20 feet from the runway and all of a sudden I feel a gust of wind pick me up from behind, and the nose immediately points down. My lift is gone, so I'm basically falling to the ground. I instinctively yank back on the yoke, but there's no air flowing over the elevator, so I hit nose wheel first, and I thought the propeller hit too, but somehow it didn't, and sort of bounced forward into a precarious position, where the left side wheel and nose wheel are touching the ground and my right wheel is still 2 feet in the air. It looked like the left wing might drag on the ground if I didn't just front flip onto the runway. Not really sure how that ended up settling. I guess the wind just died down. Next thing you know, I'm stopped on the runway and the airplane is violently shaking. I'm thinking I bent the prop shaft and I'm violently shaking adrenaline, and I rev up the engine a little to get going and get off the runway. The engine ended up running smoothly after a few seconds and the shaking stopped. Unsure about what just happened and how the airplane could possibly be okay, I taxied to the fuel pump and shut down. It took me a few hours after I refueled, calming myself down, and then building up the courage to get back in the airplane and fly home. It is a 15-minute flight back to my home airport and I did the whole thing white-knuckled and quivering. But I'm glad I did. I ended up having a great landing, and had I not gotten back on the horse that day I may have never got my license. Still though, that moment when I lost control and all I could see out of the windshield was runway, scariest moment of my entire life. In my early 20s I was at a gas station pumping gas into my car when a man in a raised dirty truck pulled up across from me. He seemed really agitated and angry. He started putting gas in his truck too. Then he looked over at me and said, "Get over here. I need to talk to you." I looked around and there was no one else with us. I told him I was not coming over there, and I didn't know him, and didn't need to talk to him. He then demanded that I get over there right now, because he thinks the pump is charging him wrong. So I need to come over and look. I told him I didn't work at the gas station and that if he needs help to go ask someone who works there. I was getting the worst vibes from him and was terrified. His veins were bulging from his neck. He kept looking around and seemed like he was either on drugs or mentally ill. I was already trying to stop pumping gas, even though my car wasn't full, because I wanted to lock myself in my car and leave. At this point he lost it and started screaming at me to get the duck over there and stand next to his truck right now. He started quickly walking towards me while repeatedly screaming, "Get over here next to my truck. Come here." He ran at me and got in between me and my car, so I was not able to get in. The inside portion of the gas station was behind me, and he was blocking my car on the other side of me. I ran into the gas station for help, and he chased me inside yelling. I was scared he was going to grab me and throw me in his car, and he was still coming towards me in the store. I ended up running behind the counter and crouched down behind the man working there. The scary guy kept screaming at the person working there, telling him to make me get out from behind there, and started walking around the side of the counter to come back there. The person working there was yelling at him to leave and started reaching under the counter for something, I assume a gun, but don't know. As soon as he reached under the counter, the scary man turned around, ran out, got in his car and sped away. It was the scariest thing that has ever happened to me. I have no doubt that something really bad would have happened to me if I would have gone over to his car, or the worker did not let me behind the counter. My dog and I were walking on the border of a nature reserve forest. There were no paths in that deep, so we just walked on a field public path. My dog looks into the forest and we see this crazed man looking back at us. I can't explain his expression. Stupidly I said something, and they didn't respond, and just started to walk away. Me and my dog both just ran further down the path, and then I called one of my friends for comfort. Once I realized what he looked like, and the expression on his face, a sudden wave of fear and anxiety came over me that I've never really felt. I wonder who that guy was. My husband forgot to close the baby gate at the top of our stairs, and I walked out of our bedroom to see our 10-month-old baby sitting right at the edge of the top step. When he turned to look at me, he lost his balance, and like a slow motion horror story he went over the edge and tumbled all the way down. I screamed and ran down after him and scooped him up to check him over. Thank God he was completely fine, and he even stopped crying after only like 2 minutes. I was so certain he was going to be seriously hurt. Terrifying. Consider subscribing if you enjoyed this video, and if you want to see more of Reddit Universe.